So, yeah, thank you everyone for coming. Welcome to Panel Talk Being Independent by 1087 Studios and Tribe. My name is Kay Thomas. I'm from Tribe, and this is Celetia Martin from Tribe as well. She's the creative program director, and I'm the creative director of Tribe as well. So we've brought this to you today. We're just going to be chatting about, being independent from obviously a creative perspective as a musician, an artist, as well as obviously being independent, setting up a label as well. I'm sure many of you have questions, and we have an amazing panel with us today, which I'll let Celetia introduce. But thank you very much for coming. We will have a Q&A at the end as well, and you guys can ask all the questions that you guys want to ask. So I'll hand over to Celetia Martin now.
Hi everyone. I'm going to just get started because we are running a bit behind time. I'm just going to go down the line and everyone just introduce yourself and give a little bit about what you do. I'll start with you, Brian.
Hi everyone, I'm Brian D'Souza. I do a number of things in music. I've worked in music for about 20 years, all kind of independently. That goes from like DJing, being a recording artist. I've got a studio at 1087 as well. I also run a music business, a consultancy business called Open Ear, and a sister business we just set up called Swell, which is in kind of like the wellness space. And I run a radio station called Ambient Flo and a little label called Highlife as well. So I do like lots of things in music.
Nice. Okay, and Jason?
Hello, I'm Jason Ngimbi, founder of Polarface Recordings and A&R at Parlophone Records. And I've also created a brand new club night called Passion Fruit, which is happening on September the 23rd. So if anyone's available that day, speak to me and I'll give you more information. Yeah, I've been working in music for nearly 5 years now.
Okay, and Matt?
Hi, I'm Matt Ross. I worked in music most of my life for 2 or 3 decades, and mostly at majors early on, at Sony and then BMG, marketing and A&R. And then in the live sector in the Caribbean, in Trinidad and Tobago specifically, and then more latterly, the last 4 years in the independent sector with a nascent music venture called Don't Sleep that's cross records management and publishing. And yeah, I think I'll leave it there. Yeah.
Okay, no, that's good. I'm going to open this question just to all of you, so just jump in. What were your motivations for starting an independent label? Jason?
Yeah. Can everyone hear me well, yeah? Cool. So I'll try to keep this quickly. So 2015, I had a situation in my life where I had meningitis. I nearly died from it. But I mean, from the grace of God, I'm happy I'm here. And after that situation, that left me in a really dark place, and I kind of wanted to do something which I knew would make me happy, and knew I had a passion for, and music, something which I've always grown up listening to. So I went to university and I was doing a business degree, and I was thinking, what can I do with this degree which could make me feel happy I'm doing this degree? And I thought, no, I love music. Why don't I just think of an idea of running a record company where I could do my degree, but I could also align it with my passion, and that was like my motivation of me starting my label.
Nice. And how did it feel once you got started?
It felt great. Like I was saying this to Matt in the backstage that I remember my first launch party I did in 2016 for the label, and my best mate's over there actually. He's shy now. He was me and him. We set up the label, and we did our first launch party. And I was in my second year at university, and I remember getting all my mates to come to this party, and then I was telling them this idea of doing this label. And I think a lot of people thought at the time that it would be like a uni phase, but my friends seeing it now, they're like, bloody hell, Jason, like you've taken it so seriously, you've done a great job on it, so yeah.
Okay, I can see you nodding your head, Brian. What was your motivations?
I was nodding because I had a similar story in terms of university. It was just like such a good incubator, like met so many friends and connected with so many people through music and DJing and stuff. Like at school I was a DJ, but I was the only one in my school, which is mad. It shows how old I am, because I bet that's not the case anymore. but it was such a non-cool thing to be doing. I was just so passionate about music, and I think that's what extends through everything I've been doing, like professionally, since I left school, going through university, meeting people, connecting people through music. And then the natural extension for me was running parties, and then that turned into a record label, because we were just doing something that, I don't know, we just needed an output, and sharing it with the audience that we had. Can you hear me? Oh, yeah. I was brought up in Glasgow, we were running parties there, and we were doing some cool stuff. We were bringing a lot of artists from around the world. We were sort of somewhat pioneering a sound that we original, and then therefore just we felt that it deserved to kind of release some records and get that out there. And it's a small part of what I do, like kind of creatively, but it's a nice thing to have that output and to be able to sign artists that we were feeling that we felt weren't getting a platform elsewhere, and share that with the rest of the world. So I love sharing music, and that's the fundamental thing that drives me.
Lovely. Matt, obviously you've come from majors to begin with. What's motivated you to come over to the independent side?
In many ways, it was an organic process, and I won't go and labour the complexities of that at this point now, but the mantra of Don't Sleep, the founder of which is an ex-colleague from my time at BMG called Dean Bryce, the mantra is supporting artists that push culture forward, and that in many ways distills the motivation to do it. Having worked in various different roles in majors and then outside of majors in life, in my career life, there's something intrinsically exciting about working with creative people, making music. I don't do so myself, and so that's got a certain sort of excitement. And the aspiration to do that and be involved in the genesis of that art, and seeing it from those early stages to a point where it amplifies and touches people, that makes me happy, and it's what I love being involved with and doing. So that's really that was really the motivation, and doing that in a boutique way outside of majors gives a certain latitude to be involved with a much broader aspect of that process, and you have latitude and freedom to take it in different places that sometimes you're more constrained working in bigger machines in different ways, where you're part of a much wider team doing a couple of specific things on a much bigger project. It's a different rhythm, a different thing. But yeah, being involved with creative people, creating stuff that pushes culture forward.
Nice. I feel like that's the common thread, most of it. But I was going to ask you, Jason, I'm going to zoom to this question because I know with time and everything. What support did you have or didn't you have when you started the label? And I'm just going to jump as far as funding. How did you get funding? Did you have any?
Funding all came from my student loan. So money which I was supposed to survive on and look after myself all went into my record label, because funny of it, I thought, forget about food when I just spend it on paying for the engineer. And it's a bad mistake, but because I love it so much, I just didn't care. I was like, I'll do anything I can to support the label. And, I kind of felt like going to university, it was like the perfect time for me to start the label because I had so much free time. So I was quite lucky that having university grants, I knew I would be able to fund the label and kind of keep it going. Yeah.
Okay, and Matt, obviously you consult for the label, but as far as funding and starting the label, do you have any?
My position, I don't consult for them. This is a complexity. I work for a company. We do a bunch of things. One of the things we do, we develop IP. We also have some equity investments, a football club and a children's animation venture and a music venture, that's my standing in that was there. But really, that formal picture doesn't really tell the story, because we found it around Dean's relationship with an artist called Berwin, who was in a car without his immigration status, as it should be at the time, and I gave him some cash to help sort that out. And that was the genesis of it. Started managing him, and it evolved from there. The company I worked for. So I guess there's two answers to that. In the early stages, it was just bits of cash that we were fortunate enough to have in our orbit at the time. You can start a label with sweat and minimal cash, but it's always harder because no matter how basic you're going to do it, there's things need to be paid for, and you can't always ask for favours. It's unsustainable. So you need something. But the art is what drives it, and so as long as you can use that something to create something more that gives you momentum forward, you can move to those next bits of cash. And there's a bunch of grants and sources of cash that are available for specifically this sort of stuff. That next stage with our venture, the company I'm working for made a capital investment and has an equity position in the company, which was a significant sum of money, but not an unrealistic sum of money. It's 125 grand or something like that, and they still have some of that in it as working capital, which isn't everyone's story. But yeah, so it was a mixture in terms of how that was funded, that's sort of idiosyncratic, but initially just funds that we can scrape together and around an artist doing a specific thing, like an acorn growing and just trying to feed that. And I think the important thing for me to say is that you need to be mindful of finance. It's critical, and you need to understand what you're burning, what you're doing, and where it's coming from, so you don't run down cul-de-sacs, and so you can plan ahead and then get it from wherever you can get it. If it's a piggy bank, if it's a savings, if it's wherever, or from an investor, or from grants from various bodies. Get it from wherever you can, but I think the important thing is how you then use that, however small or large. It needs, what's going to drive the momentum of any label forward is the art. That's what's at the heart of it, the music, what's created. So the important thing is wherever you get it from, and however small it is, you need to make that grow by pushing it into the art and it producing something that feeds back into being able to get more money or more momentum going forward.
So, based off of what you're talking about now, I want to open up to the others. In hindsight, obviously you've all started with, small funds or whatever money you could get your hands on. In hindsight, are there other ways you look back and think, oh, actually I should have done that, or I could have got the funding from there if I'd have known at the time? Any tips on that?
I mean, I come at it slightly differently. I think it depends on what your initial objectives are in terms of why you're releasing the music, where you want to get to, because certainly if you want to try and penetrate the charts or get anywhere close to that, yeah, you need some funding, you need a campaign, you need to build up the following, etc. For me, it was, I guess I'm largely in the sort of dance music scene, and my son, and also known as Hulk, and it's a little bit of a cottage industry, as probably most of you know. I mean, you can start with a USB stick, with a laptop. Your overheads are so much smaller. You could be a touring DJ, with just a bunch of tunes. You could build up a following that way. You can start earning decent money from doing gigs, even just locally in London, and then you get a name for yourself, travel around. You can quite easily, well, not easily. I'm not doing it to service, but it's a lot easier, I think, to get into that world than be an artist that's going to penetrate the pop world and need a team behind you and stuff like that. So I was lucky in terms of that. For me, in terms of startup capital, DJing for me came first, so I was earning some money through that. We were doing parties and we were, say earning money, but it was hit or miss in terms of whether we break even or not. But anything that we would have made would then get ploughed back into like the label and how we would then output the records. It started off just being a white label kind of thing with hand stamped, and there was a lot of love that went into it. Our motivation was just to get the music out there to our small kind of niche audience that would then book us to play elsewhere. So in effect, it was a shop window, really. We never looked at it as like a money-making thing. If we break even on a record selling like 500,000 copies, that was like success. And we had a really good distribution deal as well. That was what helped us, give us a financial backing, really. It was, like a P&D deal. They would do all the kind of like the pressing and everything, the distribution stuff. So we had very little overheads to be able to get our sound out to a small audience that served our purpose in terms of being a shop window.
Okay, did you have anything to say on that?
Yeah, just going back to Brian's point, that was the same with Polarface. Obviously, I wasn't always relying on my student loan. I would put on club nights or live gig events as a way to raise capital for Polarface. But going back to your point, I think looking back at it, now I've been doing it for 5 years. I sometimes think to myself, I wish in the early days I could have gone in a more of a professional way, where sometimes talking to potential investors or even trying to get advice from banks, because at the time I didn't really know any of it. So I was like 19, I just thought, whatever, I'm just going to just do it. But yeah, looking back at it, I do realise there was kind of those opportunities which I could look into, which could help me have more funding for the label in the early days. Yeah.
I want to go back to something Brian was talking about, touched on distribution. How have you seen distribution change over the time span of your careers? Are things easier now or more challenging?
Well, I mean, it's an interesting question because I think even since when we started our Highlife label, which was 10 years, we were hell-bent on releasing vinyl. Vinyl would get to the hands of DJs, and it was the cool thing to do. Having the physical product felt more legit than having just a digital release, which you could do quite easily at the time. And I think that's changed now. I think there's obviously the vinyl pressing kind of plants, the lead time is so long. I think there's this question over the impact on the environment that people are much more conscientious about as well, and you have to be respectful of that. So I think it's easier to probably release your music, but then we were just talking before, it's what is a release nowadays? I think that notion is being questioned. Is having a tune out on TikTok for 30 seconds, is that a release now? Probably is, to the younger generation or whatever. So we've transitioned from my generation, which was have a physical product, into the streaming generation, into the TikTok generation or whatever. So in terms of the output and answering your question, I actually don't know. I'd be interested to hear the other panels, what you think of that.
I'll jump in just because I'm the oldest, so I've got the longest runway, and I think the short answer to your question is it's changed enormously. Distribution is one of those gates that those gatekeepers. I started at Sony in 92. Distribution is one of the gates, along with media, that the gatekeepers were manning, and that really prevented many people in a grassroots way with aspirations to enter. That was one of those barriers to entry. That's changed unrecognisably now with digital music, and the internet has revolutionised all of that, and it's brought down those barriers to entry. That doesn't mean that the challenge of creating art, music that gets traction and that creates momentum, creative momentum or commercial momentum, but just creates momentum, moves you forward. It doesn't mean that challenge is any less onerous or easier. It's not. In fact, in some ways, those barriers to entry mean that there's even greater competition just quantum-wise. You still have to make music that's competing with the Premier League out there. There's no leagues. If you put music out, you're competing with Beyonce, you're competing with everyone else. And so that challenge remains the same, but actually to create music and to distribute music has changed so unrecognisably from even just my time beginning in the 90s to now. So people can make music in their bedrooms on phones cheaper, and they can get it out with far less encumbrance than before. Which I think overall is a good thing, but I wouldn't want to say that like it's some panacea that means it's easy and that it isn't still a challenging endeavour.
Do you have any, something to add with the distribution, considering obviously you're a lot newer with the label and...
Yeah, it's interesting because obviously you look at it in the 90s when you could buy physical. Just around research, like a lot of my favourite independent labels, that's how they were able to be successful, because they'll do stuff on white labels or sell vinyls or sometimes print out CDs, and you could make money from it, where an independent label in today, financially, it could be very difficult because we're usually having a lot of our money through putting our music out on DSPs. So there's pros and cons, where the cool thing is that I was able to start my label with not even having any money, but just having a really cool record, putting it on DSPs, and then letting my friends or anyone who were into that artist to listen to the music. But then you look at how much you're getting for your financial reports, you're realizing it's not a lot. So you have to think of other ways to try and make money so you can keep the label afloat. So distribution, yeah, it has its pros and cons, and I think in the future, we obviously would love to see more DSPs supporting labels and hopefully raising their royalty rate so the artist and label can have money.
So, talking about royalty rates, for the people that don't know, I know with independent artists, obviously you're going it alone. Sometimes, I mean, I've spoken with a lot of artists where you mention royalties and they only know of the one type, which is the writer royalty. As far as independence, what rights do they own? So if an artist is now deciding he's not going to a major, what's the difference for them when it comes to like their ownership?
So around 2019, I was managing an artist who I met in the Manchester music scene, and he was having loads of labels hitting him up, Warner, Parlophone, any label you could think of. I remember we did that whole High Street Kensington journey from Sony, Universal and Warner, just chat to so many A&Rs. And then from those meetings, the A&Rs would meet, they had a different perception of what they wanted that artist to be. So it got to the point where the artist said to me, Jason, I don't want to even think about being signed to these labels, I'd rather be independent. And around that period, that's when Polarface was started. And I said to him, why don't we do a deal where the label Polarface, we release your first EP. And the deal we said to him was, you know, he can get 60% of profit and we get 40. Just for him to realize that, like, we value him so much and we're giving a better deal compared to what the majors would have given him. Obviously, the major would obviously offer a great advance, which could allow him to do music full time, but he got to a point where he was like, he's happy to not get a crazy advance because it means that he would get a better royalty percentage. Yeah.
I think this is a massively complex issue in the sense that there's loads of different revenue streams for different rights. There isn't a one answer fits that call because you acquire rights, and depending on how you structure your deal and what the nature of that deal is will determine what rights you're passing over or doing a deal for or assigning, and which rights you're retaining, royalty rates, but also retention periods, post contracts. So there is a multitude of different rights. There's rights in the composition, there's rights in performances and in recordings, there's mechanical rights as well. So there's a multitude of different rights. And I think, interestingly illustrated by Jason's anecdote from his story, I think there's always a trade-off. So he was able to work with his artist and give a much more generous royalty, and I'm sure more favourable retention of his copyrights. It was him, I believe. Whereas the shape of that deal was inconceivable to have at a major, but there's no free lunch. You get a major an advance against those royalties, which might be useful at that time if you don't have a trust fund or whatever. And also you get the infrastructure and the machine of that major, which, depending on what your artist's story is at that moment, might be of utility or might not, and might be of greater utility than having a 60% share on a royalty. It might lead to a bigger pie, it might lead to you being able to go on the road with a band, which you otherwise wouldn't do. So it's a nuanced question. There's not one metric that will say that's good, that's bad, and it needs to fit the circumstances that you're in, or you're in as a venture, or your artist is in, or you might be the artist. And so it's a strategic thought about where you are, where you want to get to, and what you need to get to there. But I guess the one thing I'd say that's general is that if you're creating work or you're involved with the creation of work, you should make it your business to know what rights exist and the different organisations that will help you monetize that, so you're at least informed, and talk to people. You'll find out quite quickly in a conversation whether you've got something to learn from someone or not. And it's always, and there's loads of different angles on what's quite a complex structure, and where you go and how, what is most optimal for you will depend on those circumstances, and there's so many different variables. But I guess the other thing I'd say is that with all those things being so complex and variable, at the heart of it, the thing that always matters most is the art. And you can have the best structured deal, the most complex, wonderful deal in whichever other way. If the record's shit, you're not going anywhere. And conversely, you can have the most scrappy scenario, but if someone's created a bit of genius and got it onto a recording on an iPhone that's a bit of genius, that sparks and that does. So in amongst all the complexities and talking to people to inform yourself, don't allow that to distract you from what creates value, because the deals facilitate, the value creation goes on in the studio or in the writing.
There's something you said which gave me a bit of nostalgia, actually, when you talked about that run everyone would do, the artists would do in Kensington High Street, going from label to label. It was the way. I remember any artist, you know, you look for a deal, you've got an album, you've got a project, you take it to them, you want money for it. Obviously, recently there's just been a sudden surge of like everybody's doing more attracted to being independent or staying independent. I think heavily in the urban music scene as well, I've noticed. What do you think's behind that sudden growth? It's open to any of you.
Yeah. I definitely feel like social media has played a massive part. You're seeing people talking about independence quite a lot. People are feeling very motivated by it. I think that's definitely playing a part. When I talk to a lot of artists, like they will tell me like they'll go on social media and they'll just look at what their favorite artist is saying who are independent, and that definitely motivates them to want to keep that trajectory. Yeah.
I think like having had some insight into, you know, some artists signed to major labels, oftentimes you can kind of get stuck in this big machine, and if you're interested in just sharing, as I said before, your art with an audience, like it can often take years and it might never come out. And I've worked on some tracks with some major label artists that I thought, oh, this could do some stuff, and then it just never came out, never saw the light of day. You don't have that problem as an independent artist. You know, you can choose which path you take, and you might not do the big sales or whatever, and it comes back to like where you want to get to. Like for me, that was never my motivation. It was just to share with your friends and your peers and your extended network and see where it goes after that. So for me, the main motivation for being independent was just to be able to make some art and share that and move on to the next thing and make some more art, because that is fundamentally what the enjoyment is. Like it's the, you know, it's not the destination, it's a journey. It's, you know, cliche, but in recent times I've just really tried to get that into my head as an artist. Like I love being in the studio, I love being in the studio over here, and the process of making stuff, strip away all the financials and all that stuff, that is like the best. Like when you come up with that idea and you just hear the potential of that track, it might not even be finished yet, that is it. Like what I hate is then the process after that. And yeah, you might have a hit or it might reach an audience, that's fantastic, but the biggest high point of the process of making art will be in that studio with that, when that idea comes out of you and it's just like, wow, where did that come from? So I think a lot of artists need to remember that. I mean, obviously, I'm very sympathetic. You know, we need to make a living as well. So that's the other side of it. My approach to that was just do so many different things in music and have so many different sources of revenue that I'm not reliant on just the record label output or my DJing output or whatever, or my artist output. But that's just me.
I was also going to say, so quickly, like the independent sector's changed a lot now, where you just can't be a label anymore. You got to do so many other stuff where you got to do live events, you got to have merchandise, you got to do television. Like, you know, I think you have to be so entrepreneurial now in today's world.
Going back to the question, I'd come back to that, the internet again. The internet's changed so much, and the reverberations of which, you know, back in the day, the whole floss was like, I'm signed, I've got a major label deal, and I've got 5 options, not knowing that actually the more options is in their favour, not yours. It's like, you know, I did a £100,000 deal, I did £1 million deal. And that was like the brag. The internet's changed stuff. It's allowed more people to enter. It's allowed distribution to be more accessible to a wider range of people. That's allowed people that's closed the distance potentially between creation and selling it and making money. That then has led, and to Jason's point about the amplification of social media as well as part of that, that led to some artists being able to make it without majors. That then became a revelation. Stormzy did that, Georgia Smith did that. Then the whole floss became...
Even Beyonce.
Yeah, Beyonce.
Even Beyonce went independent, didn't she?
Well, I did Beyonce from Record One. That was a whole major story before anything independent, but that's another thing. But the ability for artists to break, to achieve a level of success from that tipping point without being encumbered with a big major label deal, and as such take 80 or 90% of the revenue rather than 17 or 19% of the revenue, if advance notwithstanding. That was revelationary for people, because then you not only take, if you can break, you not only take more money, you're also not encumbered with your partner has options on rights, you're free. And that's exactly what Stormzy did. He broke and got a gold record without a major label. That then became far more brag-worthy than I'm tied up to Universal with a 5-album deal. Made more money, unencumbered. He can then go and sign a deal to Warner's for 7 figures, high 7 figures, for 1 album, no options. So the idea of that is that, bang, you do the next album, you can then go and do another lucrative deal rather than you've done that, which is exactly what has been done. That was what Zubin, who managed Georgia, who was a lawyer, saw that. Georgia Smith had that plan right from the outset. So, it's for me, again, that's another one of the really fundamental reverberations of the digital world, and the internet shifted and changed, made things more accessible, made people realize I can do it without a major, challenges the majors to then show their worth, because that notwithstanding, majors do some shit well that you won't get anywhere else. If you want to scale and you want to go internationally, it's very, very difficult to do that without being aligned with, partnering with a major group, one of the three, somewhere along the lines, through a distribution deal or being signed directly. So, but it's, I've actually meandered a bit.
I was going to say, I'm going to stop this one because you've actually answered my next question, which is probably my last question before the audience Q&A. What are the advantages of an artist signing to an independent label? But I feel like you've answered, given us so many reasons, unless...
You know what, I know I've talked a lot, and I'll give you space. The one thing I'll say, I wouldn't say independents or majors are good or bad. They're just different things, and there are times when a major does stuff that independents struggle to do, and vice versa. The blunt thing is majors tend to be less good at early stage artist development, getting from A to B, but getting from B to C to D is what majors do particularly well, and they're happy to let someone else do that A to B, pay 10 times as much for it at B and take it there because they play to their strengths. And the converse proposition for independence.
Anyone else have anything to add to that?
Yeah, because I'm obviously running Polarface, and I also air out Parlophone, and the reason why Parlophone wanted me to join their teams because they knew what I was doing with Polarface.
Stage invasion.
They knew what I was doing with Polarface, where I'd always play a part and work with artists in the development stage. But being in those two worlds, I've seen the huge difference where working indie, sometimes you haven't got the resources to break an artist. So what you do, you develop them, and then you'll take them to a major where the major could even break the bigger. Like, obviously you had that with Berwin, with Don't Sleep. Yeah. Was it kind of similar to that?
Yeah. And then you signed to Columbia. But those early stages, majors just don't, that's labour intensive. And those shiny offices and big salaries and stuff aren't most optimal for that. So they know what they're good at.
Yeah.
And Brian?
I was at a point to illustrate what you were saying, Matt, about the value of major labels. I mean, a few years ago, I think 2015, I was releasing my second album, and we got some funding from the PRS Momentum Fund, which I don't know, it was like 15 grand or something. Which to us at the time, still now, obviously it's a lot of money. So we thought, wow, we can go global with this amount of money, which is obviously just not possible. So we got this PR in Australia, because I just toured Australia. I was thinking, right, Australia tour went really well. Let's get a PR in Australia. Let's push it there. That'll global reach, etc. And it just absolutely flopped. Like the PR was just like, I can't get you any coverage. When are you coming back to Australia? I was like, we're just there. I can't just come back. And we had just no kind of like resources, the big team, like all of the stuff that a major label could bring in terms of that global push, like weren't there, was just not there for us as an independent. So that made us completely rethink like the strategy in terms of all the releases and just stick to, your kind of core audience and location, although it's international digital, but your streaming numbers are like going to be quite indicative of where you've got your audience, and if that's in the UK, if that's US, and focus on those markets. But yeah, it's certainly UK for us. And then beyond.
I'm going to round this up with my last question so that the audience get a chance to ask. But lastly, what tips would you give someone thinking about going independent as an artist or a label?
I think, I better do this because I might get pulled away. I think throughout all the stuff I've been doing in music professionally and stoically independent through everything, it's about having a sort of single-mindedness, a bloody mindedness of just perseverance. And I said it before, like not really thinking, if you can, about the financials as much, like that will come. When I set up my sort of consultancy business, I worked like Chinese takeaways and DJs in the local pub like for 3 years until I was able to like generate any income. And that went from like, a subscription-based business selling like £30 music playlist subscriptions to like a business that's now turnover well over £1 million. So that, and that's in like just over 10 years or period. So if I hadn't done that 3 to 5 years of like hardcore just perseverance, like I would not have been able to get to where like stuff is there. And that also then helped to support my art and my creativity as well. So yeah, sorry, you got to do your time. I think that's my take.
Yeah. Okay. Brian.
My take is, like I said, just loving it. Having a passion for it, like you think about it every day. That's how I look at it. And you have to remember as well, money doesn't come in the beginning. You have to forget you're gonna be rich or whatever. You just have to just do it and just hope it goes your way.
Yeah, I think two things that sound perhaps contradictory. One is that you need to know a little bit about business and finance, because not in a highfalutin way, but just in a basic sustainable way. Because unless your life is sustained by some other means. And so that needs to accompany the development of the art. But it's all about the art. And so my advice would be that that's got to be 90% of your focus. But you also need, with that other 10%, to reflect on and be thoughtful about the practicalities, many of which are financial, some of which are practical business, because clearly the creative space isn't sustainable unless you get some of those practical things right. But 90%, but yeah, hopefully there's something from that you remember.
Thank you. I'm going to thank everyone on the panel, and now I'm going to throw it out to the audience. If you have any questions, I see someone at the back. Here you go. Can I get someone to give the mic?
That one's not got wire, right?
That
With
one's
that
not
one,
got
and
wire. Yeah, there's no wire. No, you can give it to Paris. Before you ask your question, just give us your name as well.
Hello everyone, my name is Nyota. I'm an artist and I'm an artist based in London. First of all, I wanted to say thank you to each and every one of you guys for taking the time and coming and sharing your story. It really means a lot. So I have a questions for all of the panels. What is one of the things that you have struggled the most being part of the industry, and how did you overcome it? Like what actually really made you surprised, and kind of like made you realize that, okay, like this is happening, I actually need to sort something out about it. And whatever situation it is, I would love to know. Do I give the microphone back?
So I wasn't hearing fully well. What are one of the things that has been the biggest challenge and struggled the most with in the industry? Wow, it's a really interesting question. It's a challenging question. Difficult questions in panels, that's the thing. I think one of the things that, everyone's story is going to be really different, and at my age, I've had different challenges at different times in different chapters of that story. I think one of the things I find most challenging, have found most challenging throughout that, is the time frame that it takes art, music specifically, to come to fruition can be so frustrating, and it's only after being round the block a bunch of times and that you realise, oh, that wind in my sails that I felt there, because I thought that record's going to be a hit from whatever angle you're involved with it from. And then not all of a sudden, but then gradually it doesn't. And you realise, wow, I thought that was going to go in the net. And after a while, to maintain your motivation, whatever that is, when through that disappointment, again, from whatever it is, what angle it is has been one of, I'd say, a constant challenge, and something that would be useful for people stepping in to know and be aware of. Plenty of times you think that was a hit when it left the studio, that was, oh, they love it, everyone I've played it loves it, and then it doesn't quite do that. In many ways, commercially, making music is a business of failure. Most of the things don't succeed and create revenue. You have to accept that, you have to understand that, you have to understand the time frame of that fruition, or you'll be surprised by it and may demotivate you.
I had a situation where with an artist, worked with right from the beginning, released an EP, went really good, and then when the majors want to start coming in and having conversations, that's one of the most challenging parts when you're trying to persuade an artist to want to stay with you, because you'd be thinking you did a lot of hard work, you worked hard together, and then you had a bit of success, and then now somebody wants to take that success and reap the benefits. So that was a very challenging time, but it was a great lesson for me to encounter. But yeah, that was one. I know you speak to a lot of independent record companies. It's happened so many times. Like the indie works so hard, and then the majors want to come in.
Stretch. I just echo quite a lot of what Matt said. Actually, it's as an artist, it's a popularity contest, and that's such a challenge to deal with, because, as you said, you can make the best thing that you think you've ever made or whatever. It always is when you're making it, and then it just doesn't go anywhere, or people aren't feeling it the same way. That is so tough to take. Like, you want everyone to love it as much as what you do, and you want to share it with the others, and you just got to keep taking that, like, almost rejection, and it builds up an armor, and you just got to take that on board and keep persevering, keep going with it.
Any more questions?
This one's more for Matt. Sorry, chaps. But it was a question that you answered before. Would you say, like, a big selling point of the independent labels now, with like the more contemporary emergence of like self-made stars, so like the TikToks, the like influencers who turn to music, would you say that being an independent and giving them an opportunity to retain more rights to their music rather than give a bigger advance up front is a big selling point, or is that like playoff still there big time?
I think the short answer is yes to both of those questions. That I think TikTok and all the multitude of other social media that I'm not as familiar with as I should be, absolutely create an opportunity that didn't exist before to do something and expose it and get traction and monetize it. And if it allows you, if it makes that closer, that means you don't need to engage a bunch of intermediaries, then absolutely it leads to you being able to retain the greatest value, because there's no free lunch. So I'm trotting out loads of cliches here, but there's no free lunch. So any intermediary that's going to be involved in moving your stuff forward is going to need to be remunerated in some way, money or rights. And so absolutely, it disintermediates that. So yes, it does. Doesn't make it any easier to do something that's interesting, but yes, but that is, as I said, as we touched on, still the trade-off. Do you give something away, rights to revenue, rights to copyright, for a resource that an organisation is going to bring in to give you a greater chance of success? That might be in the actual creative process itself, because they're able to secure higher caliber producers or writers, etc., etc. Or you've done all that work and it's just about the expertise and the infrastructure to take it to market and promote it in the market. And actually, that's going to give me a greater chance of success, so I don't mind taking half the percentage or not having the rights back until 15 years post-term for that, because that will then lead me on to that next stage. And so those trade-offs are inescapable, and they're always there. And I think even for an individual as an artist, but also for ventures, the Don't Sleep venture that is sort of by virtue of which I'm here, we go to market through PS, Play It Again Sam, who do label services deal. We have a distro deal and a co-op deal. The co-op deal, the difference is distro is label services and distribution. We retain a decent chunky royalty. On the co-op deal, PS actually fund the advance to sign artists. And we get very little in terms of any royalties. However, so the flip side of that is that Dean, the founder of the label, is just about to close on signing a producer artist in the US called Cam Obi, who's worked with SZA and Chance the Rapper, and Chance is on the record, J. Cole's on the record, blah, blah, blah. And that it's a 6-figure deal. No way possible that the venture would have been able to secure that deal. No options on the record, but the artist turned down a 7-figure deal in the States to do that here because he's creatively driven. So it's opportunistic, it's nuanced in many ways, but it would not even be in the realms of possibility were we not using, not a major, but PS to fund that, because it's a capital-intensive thing. There's another artist called Lucci, L-U-C-I, plug, that similar scenario, and she's in the marketplace now. She's New York-based as well, and that wouldn't be possible. And that sits within the mix of some other artists that are more traditional UK-based. Jesse is a graduate, lives in Reading, and we've been demoing at another one of the guys has a studio within the venture, and we're on advanced stage of negotiations to sign her to Sony through Black Butter. So it's going to be different strokes on each different project, but there's always that trade-off, and you are served, I think, to look strategically at where you are, what your objectives are, to then determine what's optimal for you going forward. And just have your eyes open. Know that if someone's giving you money or giving you something, invariably look at what you're having to give back. Because there generally will be something that you're giving back and giving over for that. And you just need to be aware of that. It's not don't do it or do it. But yeah, that accessibility throws up so many creative possibilities for the creative community at large. Some of it is absolute shit, and you just think, like, well, people can then get in front and do something that's just sticky, and it becomes a viral, and it becomes a phenomenon, but creatively it has little merit. But the marketplace is big, and you haven't got to like everything, you haven't got to buy everything.
Does anyone else have any questions?
Hi, I'm Alex. I also have a studio at 1087. How do you get an artist in front of all A&Rs, or how do you get all the A&Rs to an artist? I am aware that, first of all, the artist needs pretty great music, and then I've heard through the grapevine that artists also need really good data, they need an Instagram following, they need viral TikTok, all these sort of various different things. Without all of those, how is a new artist supposed to get in front of A&R?
There are a lot of ways. One, I'll be honest, sometimes contacts helps massively. A friend of a friend could be like, Jason, I found this artist, check them out. You listen to it, you're like, oh, I love the artist, and I can have a meeting with them. Data, I also utilize that to find new artists, and I very much support the idea of still supporting grassroots venues. So I try my best to go to as many gigs as possible to find talented artists. And sometimes when I go to A&R meetings, I would say to my boss, look, I've watched this artist play at this bar, thought he was fantastic, or he or she watched this artist play in the bar, thought they were fantastic. I want to support the artist. And then my boss can come up to me like, the data sadly is not there, but what you can do is just keep monitoring it or just stay in the picture. So I find myself usually creating friendships with these artists where I'm just trying to help them out where they can have sessions ideas or introduce them to lawyers or introduce them to management, introduce them to people who can actually like build the artist so that in the future, when the artist is releasing new material and is getting a lot of support, I can actually come into place and actually sign them. Yeah.
What data are you looking at specifically?
Chartmetric, Labour Radar, Sodatone, even Instagram, TikTok. Like, I think right now in the music industry, you kind of have to be a bit of a tech-savvy person. I think the times of just listening to music or going, let's say, going to venues or just, I think that's kind of changed now. I think you can still keep those principles, but I think you also have to monitor data as well.
Thank you.
I'm not going to say much because it's interesting with different generations and the whole data underbelly is not from my time in majors, and it's interesting, but I would keep coming back. I know it's trite because you said it in your question. It starts with great music, because if you have something that's inspired in terms of the creative process, it will gain traction in various different places, whether you put it in the public domain digitally or whether you go and play at one of the grassroots venues that Jason's talking about. And I think that's crucially important. You've got to keep your focus on the creative process of the art and have a leap of faith that if that is then good enough and sticky enough, it will generate its own momentum. I did A&R for 3 years at Columbia back in the day, way back. And I used to invariably open meetings with artists that came to see me with a statement that I'd say to them, look, I hope you need to find something intrinsically satisfying in this creative process, because and I'd make sure I say this before listening to their music so they didn't think it was some euphemistic way of saying I'm not impressed. And I'd say you need to find something intrinsically satisfying with making music, because the chances are, statistically, it's never going to pay your mortgage. And if you're labouring under that expectation, there's bitterness that will permeate your art and your creative process. And, you know, and I still believe that. And so if you can keep that focus on making something that's then inspired, then in a general way, you need to expose it. You'll never get in front of every A&R person at one moment, but it's about, to Jason's point, about networks and about working out who is in there, so inform yourself about the terrain, but not to the extent that it takes your focus away from making music. Make the good music. They're paid to find you, and if your shit's good enough and getting traction enough, they will find you. If they find you and it's great, but it hasn't got that data, and Jason's boss says, like, look, no, it's that, that's the time when he then keeps friends, and maybe he steers them to an independent, to the point before about, that can marshal them through those labour-intensive early stages, when they then have that data that majors can feel like, all right, we can run with that now. Or maybe the major will do a development deal if they love it enough. But loads of different artists are like, it still comes down to what you do in the studio, really.
At the end of the day, I always say it's good music, and the main people you need to get support from is people who are going to potentially be fans of your music, not A&Rs.
Which is where data comes in, because the average listener now is carrying their phone to find out what's on Spotify, Deezer, and all these things. So it does always still come down to data, I think, because that is where the fan base are. So yeah. Do we have time? One more question from anyone? We've only got time for one more, sorry. No? Where?
Hello, I'm Georgia Sell. I'm an artist from London. Thank you for this, by the way, but I'll go straight into the question. My question is very simple. I've just sort of been thinking, as independent artists, and as you've got a lot of experience in the industry, things have been changing. Probably after pandemic, things have changed again. What would you say are the main steps for an artist to sort of start growing and start building their audience and, you know, getting a little foot in the door and just, yeah.
With a lot of the artists I've worked with at Polarface who I've signed and artists who are monitoring at Parlophone, it's all come from them being really active in the London music scene. Like, I can think of any music venue in London, they've probably performed there. And that's how they've been able to build a fan base and an audience. And word of mouth, people forget, is still crucial. Because one person talks about you, somebody else is going to know about you, and it just keeps going around. Like, there was one artist I had a meeting with, and I literally said to him, like, I think everywhere I go, everyone just talks about you. Because you play everywhere in London, you do great performances, and people are fans of you. So I always say just live is so crucial.
Yeah, I'd absolutely echo that. Obviously, it was challenged by the pandemic. I mean, if I think about the early stages of my careers, when I started DJing and DJing professionally and touring internationally, I had a friend of mine who basically was a big champion of my music, and we used to run club nights together, and he kind of acted as my manager, but there was no sort of financial arrangement. And he would go around doing that thing, like talking about me, going, have you heard this guy? And like all of a sudden, he moved down to London, and he was going to all the London clubs, and he was just sort of pushing my music, you know, early demos, like first releases and stuff. And that really helped, just having this one individual pushing my stuff. But ultimately, like, when those type of people were then looking at us, we were running things in Glasgow, we had a club night, we had label, like we had a whole thing where it just seemed like there's a whole scene popping off around like our little crew. And it's human, you know, it's human connections. It's like you and your friends doing things, and then people looking at it going, wow, they've got something going about them. Like, you know, the music's cool, but people are really responding to that music, and I'm a witness to that, and that is really powerful. So what about if we gave them leverage to take that to a bigger audience? Would that bigger audience have that same feeling for that music as well? And the answer is more likely to be yes. And if it's just you going around with your tape or talking through your, you know, your own solo voice, it's like having that crew around you, your friends, and that's how you get noticed, in my experience.
So one quick one. With the artist I was managing, every performance he used to do, I used to say to him, after the performance, tell your fan base to go on their Spotify and follow you. And that made a massive difference when it came to like editorial support, because when Spotify are seeing the artists are getting support on their profile, they're more likely to show support on putting you on playlists or just showing you love, really. So I always say to artists when they're performing, of course, do the best performance so we can all be blown away by it and obviously love your art. But in the end, you kind of have to put the business hat on and just be like, look, just follow me on Spotify or follow me on Instagram, because in the day, it's the fan base which is going to make you big and support you and give you a career.
Exactly.
Can I just make one quick point that speaks to that? Don't Sleep, the venture, really nascent. It started during the pandemic. And so, you know, I just want to augment Jason's point, but the digital facet of that, because that was a music venture. Aside from the beginning with Berwyn, the rest of the roster was acquired really through lockdown. We had A&R meetings each time, and two of the younger people involved with it, they would scour digitally at home on the computers. And so they did A&R. We got probably 4 artists, one of them was about to sign to a major, blah, blah, blah. And our first interaction with them was Finn and Julian finding something that was of interest on YouTube, basically. And so our A&R meetings, that would be the scouting. They could do scouting from the sofa and would be running through all these digital things, and then it'd be like, oh, we like that, which is then was enforced because of the pandemic, but is the digital equivalent of what Jason's talking to about play every venue, because you're going to hit someone and Jason will be passing and banging, you're impressive. You know, so there's a digital companion to that as well that I think is really relevant now.
And obviously the more you're out, the more people are in the audience filming you as well, and then that's getting shared, and it adds to that as well. I just want to thank the panel, because I want to give the audience time to network with everyone as well. But if we just give the panel a round of applause, because they've been great.